This module has 2 lessons. We'll start with Microsoft Sentinel and then talk about threat protection with Microsoft 365 Defender. Let's begin with lesson 1, looking at Microsoft Sentinel. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand the concepts of CM and SOAR, and also understand how Microsoft Sentinel provides integrated threat management. Let's begin with CM and SOAR. Security Incident and Event Management continuously assess your data and look for any anomalies and correlation between the data. By doing this, it can raise any alerts if there is anything malicious that it can find within this data. Now, these systems have been in existence for a while, but it is quite costly to implement these type of solutions, simply because you have to purchase specialized equipment that can handle this kind of security, and you require security personnel who can manage these tools or hardware in an environment. Now, implementing them in Azure, you don't have to get anyone that is specialized to implement, because these solutions are provided to you as part of Sentinel, and you don't need to be specialized or buy any specialized equipment on your premises to hook up your data into Sentinel, which we'll cover shortly. Now, these systems, when they raise alerts, these alerts can be managed by SOAR, which is your security orchestration and automated response. These alerts can be handled automatically to look at if there are any threats that are posing any issues, and can be handled in a way that you might have described, or automatically stopped before they can cause or pose any issues within your environment. Microsoft Sentinel provides integrated threat management. It does this by implementing CM and SOAR as part of the solution within Microsoft Sentinel. It is collecting data continuously from your organization to ensure that it can analyze that information. This data could be coming from your users, your devices, applications, your infrastructure, on-premises and in cloud, or across multiple cloud environments. It can do this at scale, and when it detects anything that comes across as malicious, it is able to respond and target that appropriately. Now, it is clever enough to understand a user or a genuine user trying to log in and do tasks that they haven't performed before, to reduce or minimize false positives. Once it has detected an anomaly, it can do further investigation on that by using artificial intelligence tools. It can also hunt down suspicious activities at scale by tapping into decades of cybersecurity work that Microsoft has done. Once it detects something that is malicious, it's able to respond to it by using the orchestration and automated response as part of SOAR. Within Sentinel, we have quite a few different areas that we can look at. First, in Sentinel, we use something called data connectors. These are used to connect data within the Sentinel. So you can hook up information coming from different parts of your services, so Sentinel can pick them up as it would need to analyze data from different areas. You could also use workbooks in Sentinel that can help you use Azure Monitor templates to automatically start looking at different data. So when you hook up your data, you don't necessarily need to start creating something from scratch. However, you can create your own templates or custom templates to understand and view the data that you like. You have options to look at analytics, which can raise any alerts that has happened and any suspicious behavior that it has notified. It can help you with management of incidents, where you can look at any alerts that have been raised and what has happened with those alerts. We can look at automation process, which can be actions that you define on how it should respond to any alert in terms of mitigating any risks, and you can use different workflows and playbooks to help you achieve that. We can use notebooks, which are Jupyter notebooks that can help you extend the scope of what you can do with Microsoft Sentinel. Then we can look at investigation, which can be looking at in detail what potential threats and find out the root cause of those threats. Finally, you have an amazing feature called hunting that allows you to proactively chase different malicious attempts that could happen on your environment. This is to look at malicious intent of different packets or data before an alert is triggered. So you're actively looking for different types of malicious attempts. Finally, you can look at different communities to download and integrate your solutions, like getting workbooks and looking at queries from things like GitHub repositories. Let's have a quick look at Microsoft Sentinel. Let's have a look at the portal. Now, I'm back onto my Azure portal, and I am going to look for Microsoft Sentinel. Now, if Microsoft Sentinel is not on your recent views activities, you can always type that in on the search bar on the top. By typing in, it should appear up in one of your top results. If I can type it correctly. There you go. So you can see Microsoft Sentinel. Let's go into Microsoft Sentinel and start looking at some of the features it holds. Now, let me quickly switch my subscriptions so I can get the Sentinel set up. And I have a few subscriptions that has Sentinel enabled. So let's go into one of them that will have some data for me to demonstrate today. Let's hide some of these menus and explore Microsoft Sentinel. Now, while this is loading up, this is a quick overview of how Microsoft Sentinel looks like on my screen. And I have a few menus under the Sentinel blade. Now, if I can quickly scroll down to the overview page just to get some information here. Now let's hide this menu for a second so we can have a look at this data, just to get a quick glance on how my overview tab looks like. You can see it's giving me an overview of how many events there has, including the alerts that is raised and number of incidents these alerts relate to. I can scroll down to see some more details about the analytics on the kind of alerts and issues that it has raised, and some more information around the areas where these alerts have been raised from. Now, let's explore some of the menus that we have within Sentinel. Firstly, we want to talk about data connectors. This is where we get our data hooked into Microsoft Sentinel. Now, by default, I have 113 connectors available, but if you needed any connectors that are not listed within this list, you can always go to Microsoft Marketplace to download or connect more connectors. Currently, I have 35 connectors connected, and I can see across these connectors. Let me hide the menu again. So if I go through looking at these connectors, I can see there are quite a few different third-party connectors and cross-cloud connectors that are available for me to connect, like Amazon, Apache, and many other that are available for me to look at, including Microsoft Azure services. So if I filter this down to Azure and look at some of the Azure connectors, now I can see I have Microsoft Azure Active Directory connected. Let's quickly have a look at this connector to see what kind of data that it might be picking up in the back end. Now let's have a quick glance at how this connector looks like and explore some of the details. Now, I do not have access to configure this particular connector, but if we look at the kind of data that it's picking up, I can quickly go scrolling down to look at the kind of logs it's picking up and the analytics it's providing me in the back end. So it's looking at sign-in logs. So all the logs that are generated, these logs can be fed into my Sentinel as alerts or as data coming in, and from those logs it can raise any alerts depending on if there are any anomalies within that data. So audit logs, sign-in logs, and it's looking at all sorts of different data within my from my Azure Active Directory. Now, if I go back onto my Sentinel portal, and if I scroll down looking at analytics, like we mentioned earlier, you could look at different data analytics that is generating already, looking at some of the templates that we have, looking at some workbooks, or I could pick up some new rules and implement them in the environment to get some more data the way I would like to see. So if I scroll down a little, see different types of analytics it has generated for me to understand different analytics that it might be showing within my Sentinel. Apart from picking up analytics, if we go back up looking at some workbooks, here I can see Azure Monitor workbooks and other templates that might be available for me to look at and connect within my Azure environment to understand how I can display the data the way I would like to see. Also, I can see my incidents, any incidents that has been raised within my environment, and if there were any alerts that match the alerts, if there were any data or any malicious activities that were raised against the incidents I've created, it will show them up here, and they are grouped together, or any alerts that are related to similar issues grouped together as incidents in this environment. Now, the interesting part, apart from looking at and observing all of this data, we mentioned something called hunting tool. Now, hunting tool is quite interesting because it's actively looking to hunt information for you before they're actually raising any alerts. And within this, you can see different areas like reconnaissance. If there are any packets that will try to gather information from your environment, they will be captured and be picked up by hunting. You have loads of different attempts or types of malicious attack that are listed. For example, if I click on something called initial, then it will show me any initial access that was made, things like failed login attempt by something, and any other similar exploit where things are trying to access your environment. So you can see loads of different types of alerts that this can raise for you to look at, and different issues that it can go hunting for you before they can actually raise up as alerts and defend you from there across your entire setup. Now, that's a very quick view of what Sentinel looks like. And just to quickly look at the SOAR parts, the automation parts, where you can decide or describe on any actions that it should take. There are obviously ways you can decide using some playbooks and automate how it should respond to some of the queries, and it should be able to act or mitigate your risks automatically by looking at the orchestration and automated response within the automation part of Sentinel. Let's look at lesson 4, describe threat protection with Microsoft 365 Defender. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand what is Microsoft 365 Defender service, and it provides the integrated protection against sophisticated attacks, and we'll explore the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. Microsoft 365 Defender is an enterprise defense suite that protects against sophisticated cyber attacks. With Microsoft 365 Defender, you can natively coordinate the detection, prevention, investigation, and response to threat across emails, identity, and applications. Microsoft 365 Defender allows admins to assess threat signals from applications, emails, and identity to determine the attack's scope and impact. It gives a greater insight to how the threat occurred and what systems can be affected. Microsoft 365 Defender can then take the automated action to prevent or stop the attacks. Microsoft Defender for Office 365, formerly Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, safeguards your organization against malicious threats posed by emails, links like your URLs, and collaborative tools including Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and other Office clients. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 covers these key areas. Threat protection policies, where it defines the threat protection policies to set appropriate level of protection for your organization. You can view real-time reports to monitor Microsoft Defender for Office 365 performance in your organization. You can use the leading edge tools to investigate, understand, and stimulate and prevent threats. Automated investigation and response capabilities can save time and effort investigating and mitigating threats. Microsoft Defender for 365 is available in 2 plans. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 Plan 1 comes with Safe Attachments, which checks the email attachments for malicious content, Safe Links, which scans each link that's within your emails, and it prevents any malicious links or blocks them and allow any normal links. You can do protection for SharePoint, OneDrive, and your Microsoft Teams, and it also allows you to detect any attempts to impersonate your user or internal or custom domains. A real-time report that allows you to identify and analyze recent threats within Plan 1. Now, with Plan 2, You get everything that's available within Plan 1, but it allows you or adds additional features like Threat Tracker and Threat Explorer, looking at automated investigation and response, Attack Simulator. These can be quite interesting to look at, which are realistic attack scenarios that you can implement within your organization to identify any vulnerabilities within your environment. It can also help you with proactive hunt for threats with advanced hunting and investigate alerts and incidents in Microsoft 365 Defender. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 can come with different subscriptions, such as Microsoft 365 E5, Office 365 E5, Office 365 A5, and Microsoft 365 Business Premium. If your subscription doesn't include Defender for Office 365, you can purchase this as an add-on. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, formerly known as Microsoft Defender for Advanced Threat Protection, is a platform designed to help enterprise network protect endpoints. It does this so by preventing, detecting, investigating, and responding to advanced threats. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint embeds technology built into Windows 10 and Microsoft Cloud Services. This technology includes endpoint behavioral sensors that collects and process signals from operating systems, cloud security analytics that turns signals into insights, detections and recommendations, and threat intelligence to identify attackers, tools, techniques, and generate alerts. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Moving into the cloud increases the flexibility for your staff and your employees. However, it can pose loads of different complexities and new challenges for your organization. Keeping your apps secure and also allowing people access to them from different parts of the world in the cloud can be quite challenging. To ensure this, you can use Defender for Cloud Apps that can help you with ensuring that it can give you a full insight of all the apps that you have implemented and provide you with all the information you need on where the data flows within your organization. And this could be data coming from anywhere within the cloud services that you have. It also helps you look at any apps that are unsanctioned or restricted or should be restricted or not permitted within an environment, something we refer to as shadow IT, so rogue apps and unsanctioned apps within your environment. Now let's have a quick look at how this looks like by going into the portal. We're here on Microsoft 365 Defender portal. We'll explore the portal just in a minute, but before we do, while we're talking about the cloud apps, let's jump onto or scroll down and look at the cloud apps feature. Now within the cloud apps, if I look at the discovery, it should show me all the information about the apps that I have running within my environment, with providing more detailed insight on what is happening with these apps. At a quick glance, I can see on my dashboard different apps that it's collecting information from, different IP addresses that people have used to log into these apps, number of users that are currently working with this, and the amount of data that's been flowing through these apps. Now it's very important that we keep an eye on some of this, simply because most of your data that's crucial to the environment is controlled or used by these apps. So you want to monitor and understand what apps are used by your users, especially when they're bringing their own devices and working in their own environments. Let's explore these apps a little bit more. So let's have a look at the 291 apps that are coming up on my portal. Now, I can filter them down if I know what app I'm looking for, particularly by looking and browsing through this. Let me move that portal away a little so I can get more space to show on the screen on different apps it's coming up with. Now, these apps currently are listed based on the score that is rating these apps. And it does this by looking at the details depending on the different compliance, different legislation, different standards that it looks at, and rating that app and giving it a score out of 10. Now this particular option for Microsoft Exchange is rated 10 because you can see it has all the green ticks available next to it, along with the compliance standards, the legal parts of things, and in terms of security, it can cater for all of these options, and these are all switched on. Now if we look at another app. So if I come back out of this app for a second and switch the score down to something that's rated very low in terms of my apps, let's pick up one of these apps over here. So if I click on this to see more information around this, and you can compare how this app doesn't necessarily offer all the security features that I might need, doesn't offer all the compliance standards, which might be important for me. So for my organization to implement such an app might be quite risky. So I might look for an alternative which can offer the standards of compliance or legal aspects that can cater or work for me. Now, if those features are available, do I have them switched on? And you can see that by looking at red and green ticks. And this is how you can understand how these apps are rated based on a score. Now, apart from that, I can filter these apps looking at the apps that are sanctioned, that are good to work with, or my IT staff is happy and knows they are compliant to be working with, and apps that are not allowed or shouldn't be allowed in terms of the shadow IT or non-apps that have been utilized by people. You can go in there and unsanction them. For that reason, you can simply look at unsanctioned tag. And for instance, if I filter these apps by looking at what apps are sanctioned and unsanctioned, it shows me a quick review of apps that are probably utilized and data has been captured about them, and we have unsanctioned them so users can't go and utilize them. Now you can find out more information about who is using these apps, not just about what apps, but you can find out more information about different resources that were used, the IP addresses that were used to log into these apps, and the users that were working with these apps. So if I click onto the app itself, I can go into more detail about the app once it's ready to load. And I can find out more information about overall security about the app that we looked at earlier on. You can see 12 users have used this app, the amount of data that traveled between 7 different IPs that they've used, and you can see some detail about some of these users, which is part of my demo portal, and you can see what these users have been doing and what they have been looking at. So you can get the detailed information around a particular app that's been utilized. Now, I mentioned users, so if I jump onto the users, and you can look at different users that are utilizing different apps, and you can go hunt that or look at that by individual user, what app they're using, how much data they're utilizing, and you can go by looking at what IP addresses each user is using. If that IP address changes, so you can monitor some of that if they're hiding behind unknown IP addresses or non-malicious IP addresses. All that can be listed and seen over here. Now let's go back onto the portal, onto the slides. Microsoft Defender for Identity uses signals, which can be from your on-premises Active Directory, to identify, detect and investigate advanced threats, compromised identities and malicious insider actions directed at your organization. Microsoft Defender for Identity covers these key areas. It monitors and profiles user behaviors and activities by analyzing user activities and information across your network. It also protects user identities and reduces attack surface by providing you invaluable insights and giving you best security practices. It identifies suspicious activities and advanced attacks across cyber threat kill chain. Now, typically when an attack happens, malicious users or actors are looking to exploit any point of entry or targeting users with least privileges. This attack very quickly moves laterally and spreads across different areas, trying to gain more information that's more valuable. Now, this particular defense mechanism will stop this attack from happening from source throughout the kill chain by looking at reconnaissance, compromised credentials, lateral movements, and domain dominance. It also investigates alerts and user activities, and it reduces general alert noises by analyzing the data that it has and providing the relevant information, things that are more important in terms of security alerts. Microsoft 365 Defender Portal combines protection, detection, investigation, and response to email collaboration, identity, and device threat in a central portal. Let's have a look at this portal. We're now looking at the portal for Microsoft 365 Defender. Now, let's go through exploring some of these options that we have on the portal. Firstly, we'll look at incidents and alerts. Typically, when the alerts are raised, they can be found under the alerts area. A lot of the time, you'll see alerts raised for similar issues, and these alerts can be grouped together under incidents. So if I look at the incidents I have, I can see there are multiple alerts that are grouped together under one incident. So they're related to the same issue. Apart from alerts and incidents, you can have a look at hunting. This is where you can create scripts and queries to start looking for proactively any suspicious behavior before it can even become a threat or pose a threat to your environment and be raised as alert. You can look at threat analytics, and here you can find more information to track and respond to emerging threats with integrated Microsoft 365 Defender threat analytics experience. You can look at Learning Hub. If you need to learn about different areas, there is a library here to go and find out more information about different areas and go through different learning materials. There are some videos and some resources available for you to look at that you can learn from for different areas within Microsoft 365 Defender. Apart from that, we have areas that covers like identity, and you can look at different security and different issues related to identity and manage them from here. We spoke about email and collaboration tools that it looks at, so you can control some of that from here. Things like exploring information around emails that are being sent in your environment, if there were any malware that was used, anything similar that you can understand and explore. Apart from that, we spoke about attack simulation training under Plan P2. And this is where you can look at creating or simulating attacks within your organizations and run them to check if there are any vulnerabilities in your environment, and if needed be, attach any training for staff members. For instance, if they clicked on a malicious email, they would then be forwarded to attend a training session, so just to make sure they're aware of what they should and should not be doing in an environment. We spoke about cloud apps earlier on, looking briefly into what cloud apps can cover and the kind of details it provides in terms of different apps that can be using across your environment. Finally, we can look at checking out reports. Now, if I go into reports, it generates reports for you for different parts that are within this portal. If I click on the general security report, just to have a quick look at what these reports look like, typically it will show me an entire detailed report of everything that's covered. Because it's a general report, it'll cover all the 4 areas for me. So anything to do with identities, it'll come up with all the details about identity risks. Things to do with data will be visible for me under data section, including data loss prevention. And if I scroll further down, it'll look at endpoint devices, so it'll show me any information around endpoints that I have. And finally, looking at some information about the apps that we have and covering some details on apps, which is pulling up from the cloud app services that we were talking about. So it gives me an overall report on all the areas that we have within this portal. Now, part of this portal, we have an option that's called Secure Score. Now, Microsoft Secure Score looks very similar to Microsoft Defender for Cloud Secure Score that's available for us in Azure. But it's slightly different because this is more focused on Microsoft 365 Defender. Let's jump onto the portal again and talk a little bit more about what the Secure Score looks like and what it provides in terms of details. Now, if I scroll back up on my portal and look at the option for Secure Score, I can see at a quick glance, it gives me a score rating. Now, this gives me a quick understanding on what my current posture is in terms of security over my M365 Defender. Now, within my Secure Score, it provides me with recommendation actions where I can look into the details of what I can do to improve my current score that I've been rated against. Now, every setup or every resource or tool I have available, it provides me recommendations on how best to secure my environment by implementing it in a particular way. And it gives me a certain amount of score if I was to do that. Now, to make sure my environment is secure, I can follow some of these instructions and ensure that I am secure, or my environment is more secure, and it will increase my overall security rating on the screen. Now, if I click on one of these options over here, this says require multi-factor authentication for administrative roles, and it tells me more details that I have 7 users with administrative roles and they don't have multi-factor authentication implemented. And obviously it'll provide me with details on how I can go and do into this by going into implementation, and it will tell me more information of what I require to be able to achieve such objective. Now, you can go through looking at the list of options or recommendations that it provides you to make sure you can increase your overall secure score, to ensure your Microsoft 365 Defender is giving you more accurate information to show how secure you are across your entire suite of Microsoft 365. So in this session, we discussed the security concepts of SIEM and SOAR, talking about integrated threat management using Microsoft Sentinel. We then looked at integrated protection against sophisticated attacks using Microsoft 365 Defender service and explored Microsoft 365 Defender portal. This concludes Module 3. We'll take a quick 10 minutes break and start back with Module 4, Capabilities of Microsoft Compliance Solution. See you shortly. Welcome back from the break. In Module 4, we will describe the Service Trust Portal and capabilities of Microsoft Purview, including compliance management, information protection, data lifecycle management, insider risks, e-discovery and audit, and finally, we will describe resource governance capabilities in Azure. Let's get started with Module 4. Module 4 will look at capabilities of Microsoft Compliance Solutions. This module has a few lessons. With the first lesson, we'll look at Service Trust Portal and privacy with Microsoft. Then we'll look into the compliance management capabilities of Microsoft Purview. We'll talk more about information protection and data lifecycle management capabilities in Microsoft Purview, including insider risk capabilities and e-discovery and audit capabilities in Microsoft Purview. Then we'll move on to resource governance capabilities in Azure. Let's start with Lesson 1, where we'll talk about Service Trust Portal and privacy with Microsoft. In this lesson, we'll talk about what is Service Trust Portal and the benefits it holds. We'll talk about Microsoft's privacy principles and look at Microsoft Priva. Service Trust Portal. It provides information, tools, and other resources about Microsoft security, privacy, and compliance practices. Now, let's quickly have a look at how the Service Trust Portal looks like. The portal itself will provide you loads of information around documentation and anything that you need to know on how different organizations that work with Microsoft build their trust in terms of different security and compliance areas. There are loads of information around different compliance standards that are available for you to look at and loads of documents to explore. So you can see examples of other organizations that are working with us and how they're implementing some of these resources and build trust with Microsoft. However, you can look at some information that's listed within the portal by exploring different areas like audit reports and data protection. You could filter these by looking at different industries, for example, financial services, or different regions based on where you are, and filtering some of these information or different compliance standards based on different regions. You can find more information around Microsoft privacy, security and compliance statements, and you can find that information within the Trust Center and look for other resources and libraries that are available within the Trust Portal. So it's a very good tool to look at if you are not sure on how different compliance standards work and how you can find information more about them. Let's talk about Microsoft privacy principles. We like to put the control back into customers' hands to ensure they can understand how easy it is to use these tools and make clear choices. We like to be transparent at Microsoft, making sure you understand what data is collected and how it is going to be used, and you can make informed decisions based on that. We want to make sure everything that organizations entrust Microsoft with, all that information can be kept secured, and we do this by ensuring strong security and encryption on the data while it's at rest and in transition. We like to respect all the local laws and different legislations that are around to ensure that we can protect your data and handle them according to the different legislations in different regions that we have our services. No content-based targeting. That means we don't collect your data to target you with different marketing or advertising campaigns. The data is collected for particular reasons, and we make sure that is transparent in our policies. Microsoft collects data sometimes to benefit you in different ways. It can provide the customers with more insights on how their services are running and how they can improve these by making sure they can choose appropriate actions and recommendations to improve their services. Microsoft Priva helps organizations to discover personal data automatically and provide key analytics and insights to admins to help them understand the privacy issues and associated risks in their organization. The solution will evaluate where personal data in your organization is stored and how this data flows and the personal data trends over time. It is a privacy management solution that proactively identifies and helps protect against privacy risks, empowers employees to make smart data handling decisions, and automate and manage subject requests at scale. Priva Privacy Risk Management provides visibility into organizations' data and policy templates for reducing risks. And previous subject rights request provides automation and workflow tools for fulfilling data requests. Let's look into lesson number 2, where we'll talk about compliance management capabilities in Microsoft Purview. Within this lesson, we'll look at Microsoft Purview portal and talk about Compliance Manager and look at the benefits for Compliance Score. Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal brings together all of the tools and data that are needed to help understand and manage organizations' compliance needs. Compliance Portal is available to customers with Microsoft 365 SKU with one of the following roles: Global Administrator, Compliance Administrator, Compliance Data Administrator. We'll shortly look into how the portal looks like. Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager is a feature in Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal that helps admin to manage an organization's compliance requirements with greater ease and convenience. Compliance Manager can help organizations throughout their compliance journey, from taking inventory of data protection risks to managing the complexities of implementing controls, staying current with regulations and certifications, and reporting to auditors. We'll explore the portal and look at the compliance score, which helps you measure progress in completing recommended improvement actions within the controls. The score can help an organization to understand its current compliance posture and also helps organizations to prioritize actions based on their needs to reduce the risk. Now let's have a look at the portal and explore the Compliance Manager and Compliance Score. Let's have a look at the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. Now within the portal, on my overview, on my home tab, I can look at all the information around everything to do with compliance within my portal. At a quick glance, everything that's raised within these alerts and options that I have set up can be seen in one page. Now, if I go into my Compliance Manager, it will give me more detailed information around the recommendations once it's ready to load. And I can see it gives me overall compliance score that I currently have, and it gives me all the key improvement actions that I can use to ensure that I am more compliant to some of the policies or compliance standards or legislations I need to implement. Now, apart from that, it looks at some recommendations as well, which we can implement in our environment. For instance, if I look at one of the key improvements, let's jump onto the key improvement options on the top. So if I go into the improvement actions, I can see there are quite a few list of options that I have on my screen. If I try one of them on the top, which tells me to enable self-service password reset. Now within my demo setup, I've only enabled this for a few users. Now you can see I currently have 2 points out of 27, so I can achieve maximum points. Now sometimes you can only achieve these points if you've completed the task, and sometimes it gives you partial points on completing part of the task. In this case, I have partially implemented self-service password reset, so it's given me 2 points around that area. I can look at more details around on how I can go around and changing some of this and understand anything related to the documentation on why would I need to do self-service password reset or implement that across my organization. Let's move on to lesson number 3. Here we'll talk about information protection and data lifecycle management using Microsoft Purview. Within this module, within this lesson, we'll talk about data classification capabilities, record management, and data loss prevention. Data is very crucial for organization. For that very reason, you need to understand where your data exists, so you can understand what type of data is used within your organization. Once you understand the landscape of where your data exists, you're able to implement appropriate security measures to make sure this data is secure. This could be on your premises, in the cloud, or across different cloud services. Once you know where the data exists, you can start looking at different methods to prevent this data from malicious users to access them. This could be introducing encryption at rest or in transit, so data is secure no matter where it's stored or if your services or users are accessing this data. You want to also understand that you can prevent this data from loss. That means you want to make sure if this data is affected by any malicious intent or user, then it can be prevented if it is intentional or accidental oversharing of sensitive information. Finally, you would like to govern your data to automatically keep, delete and store data records as you're compliant to different regulations that are implemented in different parts of the world. We can start looking at data classification capabilities in the Purview Compliance portal. Within this, we'll talk about sensitivity information and trainable classifiers that you can use to implement to ensure you can understand where your data exists and how you can label that data in different parts. Let's jump back into the portal to look at sensitivity label and sensitivity information. Now I'm back onto the portal. One of the tabs I have on my compliance manager is data classification. Now under data classification, it shows me different options on how it classifies the data that I have within my setup. Now I can create different trainable classifiers, so these are used to understand how a system can classify my data that I'm using within my environment. These trainable classifiers can be used as a list that's already existing. I can create my own if I needed to, if I wasn't happy with the list that's existing. Things like profanity, target harassment, looking at threats, and these can be done in different languages across different platforms that you're using. So you should be able to detect some of this information and label that data as it sees across your different suites within M365. You can also look at sensitive information type, and within this you can look at the data that is already available for you to label as sensitive information. Typically, you're looking at personal information that could be available within your environments. For example, there's a long list of options available. If we were to search for, let's assume, numbers, and I can see it comes up with examples like identification number, bank account, license number, and similar other personal information that should be sensitive information and should be labeled appropriately. Or if I change that to ID, and if I look for that, then you can see my national ID card number, my different identity cards for different regions. You can see all that information come up. So you can use some of these classifiers or some of these sensitive data types to label the data that you see within your organization and your setup. Now you can, however, go and create your own types if you don't see one that's available within this area. Now let's see how the portal actually does help me with looking at some of these labels and some of the sensitive information types that we can utilize in our organization. To do this, I'm looking at Content Explorer. Now within the Content Explorer, it's picking up all the sensitive information type and showing the existence of some of these across different tools and different services that I'm running within my M365 suite. Now I can see, let's pick up credit card numbers. Again, sensitive information in my organization. You can see it shows me within Exchange there are 2 instances of this happening. So if I click onto that just to explore that a little bit more of where this happened, I can see that this email account used the credit card details, and if I click onto that again just to find out more, I can see there was a message sent out from this user and it had information that was probably sensitive, and in this case it was blocked. Now if I go back out again and look at something different like OneDrive, I can see there are 20 instances of credit card details stored in my OneDrive. Now I can go through looking at different users that are doing this in their OneDrive accounts on your setup. Particularly over here I can see we have Alex and quite a few other users that have got at least one instance of their data, apart from Megan, where she has 2 instances of this particular data stored. Now I can go into this and find out what files she's stored where this information exists. So I can have a quick look at this file to see if it's picking up the correct information. Now I'm hoping it'll give me a quick overview of these files. And let's try this one and see if it can give me a quick overview. I can appreciate this is very small, but I'll try to zoom into this to see if we can kind of pinpoint out where it looks at that information. So if I scroll down to some of this, let's make it big. So you can see within that, I have credit card numbers, bank account numbers mentioned. So it's picked up that information from within this file and it's labeled that file that it has sensitive information. So I can explore that and find that information out within my data classification. Let's move on to talking about sensitivity labels and policies. Now, these are very interesting when you're using them within your environment. Typically, you'd like to label your data if it's got sensitive information. You can create different labels depending on what you consider sensitive. And you can define on what should happen when a label is applied to a particular file or an email. Now, remember, it mentions that this can be applied to a particular email or document, and you can ensure once it's applied, that particular email or document can be encrypted. You can use other options such as mark the content with a watermark or some sort of a header and footer that will tell you that this data or this particular email or document has some sensitive information. You can also look at some other options within making sure that you can create a particular label that suits your needs. Once you have the sensitivity labels available, you can publish them out as label policies. These label policies will then run across your environments to ensure that it can act upon as you've described within the label and the policy. You can look at things within your policy when they're published, things like making sure you require a justification if somebody is going to change a label. Maybe you want to use a particular user that is a mandatory user to apply labels. Now, this could be, for example, someone who works in a sensitive role. You might be a HR person, could be someone that deals with personal information, or maybe a financial member or financial team member that handles financial data, and everything that they create and manage is sensitive. So by default, everything coming out of that person's account should be automatically labeled. So you can apply some of these things during the creation of the policy. Now let's quickly jump back onto the portal and have a look at sensitivity labels and policies. I'm back at my Microsoft Purview Compliance portal. I will scroll down into looking at Information Protection tab to look at sensitivity labels and policies. Now, at a quick overview, it tells me information about the labels that I already have and the policies I've applied, and provides me some more information around this particular option. Now let's go actually explore what these labels look like. Now, I do have some labels already created, and these labels could define on how things would work. Let's pick up one of these labels that I already have and explore how this label looks like. Now, at a quick glance, I can see this label is applied or is called admin only, and the display name for this is user secure or secure user, sorry. And if I go scrolling down, the scope that it applies to all these areas. So this particular label should be applied to all of this information that exists. Now, once it does match any of these information, it should add a watermark to say do not share. It should add a header and a footer that should still say do not share, and it should then make sure the data is secure, or at least has a label then that can help me in publishing different policies. Now, using this label, I can publish different policies. Let's jump onto the label policies and see different policies that I've got available. Now, if I look at some of these policies, let's have a look at one of the policies that I've used in creating with this label. So if I click on that, at a quick glance, I can see that it tells me that this particular policy, when it's applied, it will, this particular label that is using as to publish as part of the policy, it will typically look at making sure there is a mandatory for all the documents and emails that is applied, and it requires justification when you're trying to remove a label or delete a label or lower the label of classification on that. Now, apart from this, I do have another policy that ensures that it shows you different policies can be, or different labels can be added into one policy to publish, and it can show that this is implementing on a particular document or email. Once applied, it should make sure that it's classified accordingly to what it should do. Now let's go quickly have a look at how these labels can actually look like in action. Let me go into my office.com and log into my online office portal. Now I'm logged in with one of the user accounts that I have, and I'm logged into my online office portal. If I click onto a new document and start clicking onto a document, and by default, when you create a document in online environment in your Office 365, it automatically starts saving the document to avoid you from clicking on save. Now in this case, I've already got a policy applying to my administrator that enforces this label as a mandatory label, like I mentioned earlier. So I'm a mandatory label user. That means every time I create a document or work with an email, it should have a label attached to it. So it's forcing me, before even I start, to create or attach a label to this particular document. So I can go and select from one of the labels that we were looking at earlier. So let's apply secure user label and apply that. Now under this label, we did mention that it will automatically apply header, footer, and some sort of watermark to my document. So if I go into looking at this document and look at the viewing option, you can see that this is the document I'm looking at, and it's automatically added a header which says secure file, do not share, with a watermark across the document and a footer that says the same. And that's what we described in our label earlier on, to ensure that it would, when the policy is pushed out, it will make sure any document that I create would have this label applied to it. Let's go back into this document that we just created and try to see if we can change the label that we've already attached to this document. Now, if I look at the top, I have my sensitivity labels. And if I look down, this was a label that was applied. So if I change the label now, it'll give me a message that will ask me to justify why am I changing the label, just to ensure that it was done appropriately by a user that should be changing the data, and not a malicious intent to remove the label and do something with the information. So it's asking me for justification. Now you can publish or push this out in different manners depending on how you publish these labels. Data loss prevention. A lot of the time people assume we're talking about data that can be backed up and can be prevented from being lost. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're talking about information that can be overshared and sent out intentionally or unintentionally with users that shouldn't have access to this information. So we want to make sure we can reduce the risk of people innocently or deliberately trying to overshare information that should be kept private. With data loss prevention, you can do this in terms of being compliant to your compliance standards without interrupting the workflow that you have within your organization. For example, a user tries to share a document containing sensitive information, that the data loss prevention policy can send them an email notification and show them a policy tip on how they should be doing that and what they are doing in terms of oversharing. Typically, the policy would have different rules applied. Now, these rules are looking at different conditions that you set within a rule environment. Once the conditions are met, the rules are implemented. You do define actions within these rules on when the conditions are met, what actions should that rule take to implement these policies. Typically, you have different locations decided on where these policies or rules should be applied. You can apply these at different parts of your M365 suite, things like your Microsoft 365 OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, Microsoft Teams, and sometimes it can also extend to your endpoint devices such as Windows 10 devices. Retention labels and policies. Different organizations, based on their locality, might be enforced by different legislations and compliance standards to hold information and retain that for a period of time. Now, this could be to do with transactions or financial data that need to be kept in compliance with different standards or legislations that you have. For instance, You might have a sales department that might need to hold information in pre-sales, might be for a few days, post-sales might be much longer. If the transaction was successful, under financial laws, you might need to be retaining that information for a number of years. It could be 5, 7 or 10, depending on the region that you belong or that data was collected. Now, based on that, you can use retention labels to create ways to ensure that as and when you see that information, it can be retained for a number of period of time that is appropriate for that particular data. You can create these labels and apply them for individual items. For example, a single document or an email. And typically, you can only apply one label at a time on a single item. Once these labels are created, you can then publish them as policies. Retention policies can be applied at a site, like an entire SharePoint site, or at mailbox level for an entire mailbox. Now let's have a look at how these retention labels and policies look like. To look at retention labels, we'll go into data lifecycle management. Within the overview of my data lifecycle management, it's showing me different information around the labels that I might already have implemented and information on how they're doing. If I go into the retention policies, in fact, let's start with retention labels first to understand what labels that I have already created. Now, you can create your labels depending on what your requirements are. And these could be to pick up, in this particular case, personal information or personal identifier information, and you can find out more details about what I want to do with any PII that's been displayed. For example, this should be retained for 7 years. And again, you can see more information about who created this, when it was created, and so on. Now, once a label is created, we can then create label policies that can help us publish these out or multiple labels out in our environment. Now, if I go into looking at the PII retention policy, I can see it's been applied at different locations. You can see it's looking at Exchange emails, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, and M365 groups. Again, you can publish these to different users if you needed to, and you can choose individual users and groups to publish these policies. Now, once these policies are implemented, you can go into looking at retention policies to see how these policies are doing. These policies can also be picking up some of the compliance standards that you've implemented just to ensure that you are compliant with any of those standards that are implemented within your organization. For example, US financial data policy. And you can see that particular policy implemented across my entire suite of M365. Now, we can have a look at this when we go into any of one of these options. So let's go back into my office one more time. This time we'll go into Exchange or go into Outlook to look at one of the emails. Now, for instance, I've seen an email that I think requires retention because it had particular data type that needs storing for a period of time. I could choose to go into Advanced and look at assigned policies and then look at retention policies. Now, these are some of the retention labels that we have already got, and the retention label that we were looking at, like PII retention policy that we saw earlier, so we can implement these policies. Once we do that, it will apply that automatically to the top of my email, telling me what retention policies apply to this email, so it should not be deleted by mistake for anyone. Let's look at record management. Now, retention policies and labels can help you in retaining information for a period of time. To be compliant, for organizations, it's quite important to understand they can keep a track of information that they have within the organization. For example, going back to an example of a sales department. Your pre-sales environment handled a query and they took some information from the client. Maybe you have different policies for different departments on how they can retain this information. That information might be passed on to your sales team. That sales team might be able to close the deal and pass it on to financial team. The financial team might be able to take financial information and complete the transaction. Now, different departments might, by law or different legislation that you might have, be required to keep this information for a period of time. And after that period of time, this data should not be held by that team or accessible by those teams at all. Now, this example could help you understand how you can manage records or have record management within your organization. If you were to be compliant for these standards, if someone was to come and audit your organization, for you to show this information clearly of how this data moved from different organizations, and you were compliant with different policies and legislations at different stages of this transaction, it might be difficult for you to demonstrate that if you don't have proper record management. Now, record management would help you in understanding how the data moves and where the data moved and how long it was retained for, along with a very important part, which is disposition. Typically, when you have data that's moved from different departments or different parts of your organization, it's easier to track that information. Once you get rid of that data and it's deleted, it sometimes can get difficult to demonstrate how this data was actually kept and maintained for a time period and now it's deleted. This is where the disposition comes to handy. Within record management, you can get a look at a disposition which actually shows you if the data was retained for a period of time and the journey of that data it took, and also when it was deleted and how it was deleted, and again throughout the journey if the data was moved from one side to another, who had access and who didn't have access throughout that period. Let's look at lesson number 4. In this lesson, we'll talk about insider risk capabilities in Microsoft Purview. After this lesson, you should be able to understand how Microsoft Purview can help your organization identify insider risks and take appropriate actions. You have an option in your Microsoft Purview compliance portal to look at insider risk management. This helps your organization to understand internal risks by enabling you to detect, investigate, and act upon malicious and inadvertent activities in your organization. Now, this allows you to understand if there was data that was being shared or overshared by users, either intentionally or unintentionally, and you can get alerts as insider risk to prevent you from any leak of confidential information. We also have compliance, communication compliance. This can also help you in understanding the communication happening within your organization using different tools, things like Microsoft Teams, Exchange Online, Yammer, and other third-party communication tools that you might be utilizing with your organization to help prevent anything like inappropriate behavior, profanity, and any sort of communication that's deemed inappropriate for an organization. Finally, you have another option called information barrier. Now, information barrier is quite an interesting option for organizations that like to split their organization to avoid any conflict of interest. If you think of an example of an organization that is working with multiple organizations to provide them solutions, imagine that organization working with 2 competitors. Me being one of the competitors, I might not be happy knowing that the solution provider that I have is working with my competitor. Now, just to rest assured for the clients, the solution provider can use information barrier to segment the 2 different teams in their organization. This creates a complete barrier between all the communication tools that you have within your M365 suite, including Microsoft Teams, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, and more, to ensure that those teams cannot collaborate with each other. So they're in complete isolation. So there's no chance for them to have any conflict of interest or working with or looking at each other's projects. Lesson number 5. We'll look at e-discovery and audit capabilities in Microsoft Purview. Now, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand e-discovery capabilities in Microsoft Purview and auditing capabilities of Microsoft Purview. E-discovery in Microsoft Purview. Now, before we go to e-discovery, Microsoft Purview has an option to look for help you with content search. This can allow you to search any content across your M365 suite. You can go to the content search and search for information that you require. Now, let's quickly jump onto the portal to have a brief look at how this works. Now, under my tab over here, I have an option to look for content search. If I look at content search, I have run a search already in the past, which is still on my screen. Now, sometimes these searches can take time to come back. Remember, this is going to be going through your entire setup to go and find the kind of search that you're generating. Now, in this particular search content, you can see brief information around what I searched for. I particularly looked for information that had a condition saying anything that was used by this particular email address that should be sent out. Now, I can change my search criteria to whatever I prefer. Things like looking at particular word, particular type of information, again going back onto some of the sensitivity or sensitive information type that we spoke about earlier, and you can search for all of them again just to see what kind of data it brings up. In this particular instance, it gives me an overview of what information is found, things like items in my emails that it might have looked for, and other information that is pulled up from across my M365 suite. Apart from that, we have an option to do e-discovery. Now, e-discovery is a very interesting tool, simply because e-discovery allows you to gather information around a particular user or a topic or within your environment. Now, this data that you collect can be used in the court of law to help or provide evidence against somebody. Because it's used in a legal process, you can gather all the information that you require against a user, depending on the type of incident that's occurred. Typically, you have two different types of e-discovery options available. You have a standard type, which allows you to create a case hold, which holds all the information that you are gathering about a user or a particular incident that's happened, and you can then export all that information out once you're happy with all the information that you've collected. However, you have a premium version for this, which allows you to add a custodian. Maybe you're a direct line manager for a person that's done something, shouldn't be involved in that process, or you require a HR team or some other team to be part of this process. In that case, you can use the premium version where you can add a custodian. This custodian should be able to create a legal hold where they can go and look for all the information that's associated to that particular incident and gather all the information, and then go through that information to find out if there's any evidence in there. Once they're happy with what they have, they can export that information out and then use that in their legal process. Now, once this data has been used or is part of the legal hold, this data won't be deleted by the user on the other end, so you can still hold that information to make sure that data exists and it's not amended by someone else on the other end while it's in the legal hold. Apart from using search content and e-discovery, we can look at auditing within Microsoft Purview. Now, with auditing, you have two different options. You have a standard version and you have a premium version. With the standard version of auditing, you can look for data that existed within the last 90 days. So that particular data would only be retained for 90 days if you were to find out information. If it's past 90 days, you won't be able to audit that information at all. Whereas with premium version, you can look for data for much longer periods. Now let's have a quick look at how the audit looks like on our portal. Now if I go into the audit tab, and I can see there is quite a bit of information already there. Some of the audits that I ran earlier, and you can see they're completed and they took some time to complete. I can go into them and find more information about how it looked like and the information it gathered. Now this all depends on the kind of criteria that you would have set for your audit to work. Typically, if I was just to look at or search for no specific criteria, it'll bring up everything and anything that exists within my environment and show or display that information. All right, let's click on the search without changing any criteria to see what information it'll bring me now. Now, without running any criteria or specifying any criteria, I can see it's bringing up all sorts of information about anything that's happened within my environment. Things like user logging in, user accessing mailbox. So we looked at a mailbox earlier. You can see which user was it, what did they do with that mailbox, and stuff like that. So you can get all the different information that happened. So it's picking up every single information that happened within my environment. Now, if I wanted to specify a particular criteria, I can go back into looking at different activities. Things like if I want to see files that were accessed, things that were changed, things that were deleted, things that were checked in, and all that kind of stuff I can categorize. And there's a long list of things you can choose from. You can specify where you want to look for this information, and also if you know a particular user that would have done something. For example, if I look for a particular user, let's assume Miriam, and let's search what Miriam has done in the last few days. And you can see it brings out particular information about this person logging in from different places, and some sort of alert that was raised based on their login attempts. Let's look at lesson number 6. Here we'll describe the governance capabilities in Azure. Now, within Azure, we'll talk about Azure policies, Azure blueprints, and Microsoft Purview. By all means, this is not everything in Azure that we can talk about in terms of compliance, but we're limited to the scope of this course, so we'll discuss just these things as we go along within this module. Let's start talking about Azure policies. Now, you can use Azure policies to implement all sorts of different options that you have in Azure environment. Things like you would like to be compliant to certain standards, you might want to restrict users from doing certain tasks, or you might want to allow them to do certain things, and you can create different policies to control your entire environment. Typically, your policy will have a scope of where this policy is applied, and then you can define more details about the policy on how it should run. Now let's have a look at this in our portal. I'm back onto my Azure portal, and we are going to look for Azure policies. Now let's click on Azure policies to go into looking for my policies. Now on the overview tab, it shows me my overall compliance to all the policies that are currently applied to my particular subscription. Now we'll go into looking at more details about these policies to understand what compliance actually means. Now, when you're implementing policies, depending on the type of policy that you implement, typically these policies are not going to stop any resources that are currently working. For instance, if I have virtual machines implemented within my setup, and I want to ensure that all the users going forward can only create these virtual machines in a particular region, let's assume UK South and UK West, and I don't want to implement these virtual machines anywhere else for any reason. It could be compliance, it could be cost, it could be depending on my solutions requirements. I could enforce that using the policies. Any existing resource that I have within that scope that I'm implementing, it might come back as non-compliant. It won't stop these current running virtual machines. It won't affect my current setup, but it won't let me create anything new that doesn't exist within that organization. Now let's have a quick look at how I can go into looking at different policies and implementing them. Now within my policies, let's click on definitions. And I can see there are quite a few different policies that are available for me to pick from. I can click on search and find a particular policy that I'm looking for. Since we're talking about location, we can type in location, and all the location related policies will come up on the top. And let's pick up the allowed location policy. Now it provides me some detail in JSON file format. Let's click on assigning and see how this process works like when I'm assigning this policy. Now, one of the key parts here is to ensure you can assign the scope on where this policy will be implemented. I can do this by choosing subscriptions and apply this policy to a subscription, or I can filter this down onto a particular resource type by choosing resource groups. In this case, let's keep this to a particular subscription and apply it to the entire subscription in this case. So let's select that subscription. I do, however, have options to exclude things that are not part, or I don't want to be part of the scope. Maybe I have particular resource types that I know exist outside of this location that I'm about to choose, and I want to leave them working that way, so I can exclude them out from here. I can look at basic allowed locations. That's the policy that we're applying, and I can apply a particular description of what I want to do. Now let's move on to my second tab, which is parameters, and within that I can see I have options to choose allowed locations. Since I mentioned a UK South and UK West, let's choose these two locations, and I'll leave the rest of the details as they are, and I'll simply go and review and create this particular policy. Now, let's create this policy, and once it's implemented, we'll go and have a look at this policy in action. Alright, seems like the policy has been successful in creating. Now let's go back onto the policies and find out this policy where it exists. Now, if I go back onto the assignments, I can see this is the policy that we just created called allow application. And if I go into the policy and look at the policy compliance, what it would do is give me an overview of how this policy is currently doing. If this policy is already active and working, remember these policies, when you generate them, they can take up to 30 minutes or more to be compliant, simply because they'll have to go and assess everything that you've implemented in your Azure environment to ensure it can give you a better compliance report to understand how this policy is going to be doing. In this case, my policy is not started yet, simply because it's going through all my resources. Once it's done, it'll come back with a long list of things that are compliant and not compliant to this particular policy that I've implemented. So you will have to wait for a time period to make sure that policy is in compliant state for you to start working with this environment. Sometimes the policies can take effect quickly, but it will show you the compliance status as and when it's done going through everything that's in your environment. If I quickly go back into my virtual machines and start creating a new virtual machine just to demonstrate on how this policy is in effect. Now, in this particular part, we're not really first with changing different options, but what I'm going to do is go straight down to the location that we've chosen for this particular resource type. And if I was to go and choose use US East, and it's not quickly picking that up. Let's try see if I can enforce this by choosing some other options. Let's drop this down into one of the resource group type and give it a name. Let's see if that picks up. So it's going to UK South, but let's change it to US Central. And there you can see straight away, by providing some details, it's come up with giving me a policy enforcement message that's telling me that this policy cannot, this location cannot be chosen because this particular location is denied at the moment. Now, if I chose the location that was allowed to me, I would be able to then create this resource type and work with it. Azure Blueprints. These are quite useful if you are working in an organization and managing environments. Simply because within an environment, you might have loads of things defined. For example, within your organization, you might have, let's say, a sales team or sales department, marketing, DevOps. And with these departments, you might have defined different roles for different users that work within that environment. You might have assigned different policies to them on what they can and can't do. Also, you might have different resource templates available for them to create different resources, including different resource groups that they can work in. If you decide to now create a new department or extend your business and have a department or a sister company, and you want to create a whole environment, instead of doing it from scratch, what you can do is utilize Azure Blueprints, which will allow you to recreate a whole environment. Now remember, we're not talking about a template. This is a blueprint, which shows you like a whole blueprint of the environment that you have. Consider looking at a blueprint for a house, where it defines everything that is going to be used within the house, the sizing, the measurements, the directions, and all sorts of different things. Similarly, in Azure Blueprints, you get to do the same. You have the whole environment's details described within it, including some templates that you might have for different resources that you're defining. Will help you create a whole environment super quick, and obviously you can go back into it and make changes according to your new environment's requirements. Microsoft Purview, previously referred as Azure Purview, is designed to address the issues faced with the rapid growth of data to help enterprise get most value from their existing information assets. Microsoft Purview is a unified data governance service that helps organizations manage and govern their on-premises, multi-cloud, and software as a service data. With Microsoft Purview, organizations can create a holistic, up-to-date map of the organization's data landscape with automated data discovery, sensitive data classification, and end-to-end data lineage. Security administrators and data curators can secure and manage their data estates, data consumers, and are empowered to find valuable, trustworthy data. You can do all of this by looking at data maps, which can help you by getting all the metadata about the enterprise data and identify and classify sensitive data. This data can be then catalogued and then easily found when relevant information is searched for. The data estate insights give you a bird's eye view to understand what data is actively scanned and where the sensitive data is and how it moves. This concludes our Microsoft Security Virtual Training Day for Security Fundamentals. Let's recap what we have seen. In Module 3, Part 2, we learned about security capabilities of Microsoft Sentinel and threat protection with Microsoft 365 Defender. In Module 4, we discussed Service Trust Portal and privacy with Microsoft, before moving on to compliance management capabilities in Microsoft Purview, including Compliance Portal, Compliance Manager, and Compliance Score. We then looked at information protection and data lifecycle management capabilities of Microsoft Purview, including sensitivity labels, retention labels, DLP, insider risk, e-discovery, and audit capabilities. And finally, we learned about resource governance capabilities in Azure, including Azure Policy, Blueprint, and Microsoft Purview. Thank you for attending Microsoft Security Virtual Training Day for Security Fundamentals. Remember, there are many ways to continue your learning journey, such as MS Learn, where we offer self-paced learning options. Happy studying.